Out of all the videos you could make, why did you choose to make this video?
We owe a debt of gratitude to Nelson Nash, but we also have to be realistic.
You made some pretty strong statements. Like, man, you're mischaracterizing him, potentially slandering his character, and he's not even alive to back it up.
You keep putting words in my mouth. I didn't say anything about Nelson's character or his intentions. It might not have been the best business decision, but I felt morally obligated to say some things that no one else seems to have the courage. And someone who's smart is going to value that perspective.
I want to address the thing that I felt like was most extreme. You've mentioned in your video about the cultish worship of Nelson.
I was kicked out of the Nelson Nash Institute for violating exactly 0 of their rules. I think Nelson Nash would have a serious problem with the way that the Nelson Nash Institute is using government violence or the threat of government violence to shut people down.
You're stirring the pot here because I would not go there with a 10-foot pole. Do you think if someone is Catholic, being a part of the Institute is a problem when it comes to the underlying faith and their convictions?
So Nelson's legacy will always be tainted because of some of the totally inexcusable things that he said about the religion that I hold dear, and that cannot be excused.
Logan Hertz, welcome back to the BetterWealth show.
Caleb Guilliams, it's always an honor and a privilege to be on your show. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you again for making the time to have me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. You are stirring the pot with your recent video. The time we're recording this, your last video that you posted was Nelson Nash wrong? The truth about Nelson Nash. And I want to read some of the comments that you got. Very, very lovely comments. You got the what's with bashing rest in peace Nelson for some language orthodoxy. You had someone come at you just from some of the comments that you made about the Catholic Church. You had someone say that you are a very sad individual. So the video got lots of views, didn't get a lot of likes.
You missed the "you're trash" comment. That was in there too. You're trash.
Oh man,
did you not see that one?
Oh,
maybe.
Is that when you said I didn't see that one. I don't know if
okay, maybe it's gone now. That sometimes happens. I don't know if you see that where someone will come at you with like all this garbage, and then a week later all the comments are gone and the user's gone. I don't know what that means, but I've seen that happen too.
Why don't you talk to me about why you made this video? And then what I want to hear before we get into at some of the points, because I watched the video. I have some points that I want to talk with you about, maybe challenge you on. But I want to hear why you made that video. And then I want to talk about what you appreciate about Nelson and all, because I think that you did mention some of that, but obviously that gets overlooked with some of the points that you made. So first and foremost, out of all the videos you could make, why did you choose to make this video?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I shouldn't have. It might not have been the best business decision, but I felt morally obligated to say some things that I think needed to be said, that no one else seems to have the courage to say. And that, to me, already indicates there's a problem. Why does it require courage to say these things? And I think you've seen, based on the reactions that I've got, why it does require some courage to say these things. I just think that we in the infinite banking footprint need to be honest with ourselves. And I think, we owe a debt of gratitude to Nelson Nash, but we also have to be realistic. That's all.
Okay. And so you made this because was there a trigger point that you're just like, I'm frustrated that people walk around, like that people just repeat Nelson to repeat Nelson, or is it just something that was kind of like always on your mind and it just kind of boiled over? Like, why did you choose to post it? Because you posted it right during the symposium, whether you knew that or not.
I didn't know that. No, I didn't know that. That's funny.
I mean, you posted it right when people were gathering together. I didn't know if that was intentional.
No, I had no idea. It was something I was building. There was no real trigger point. And I think that I will say I'm actually pleased with the response that I get, because my experience has been when you stand up and speak the truth in a way that requires courage, 99.9% of the people are going to give you the negative response that you expect. But there will be the 0.1% of people who are not going to say anything publicly, but will reach out to you directly to thank you for saying it and explain why they appreciate what you're doing and how they're now adjusting their behavior because finally they saw someone who is willing to verbalize what they'd been thinking for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm happy about that. That's what has happened every time, Caleb. Every time I've talked about the Nelson Nash Institute in this video, that's been the response is I get a whole lot of hatred, a whole lot of negative comments, but I get a small number of very high quality people reaching out to me saying, yeah, you nailed it. I really was thinking exactly the same thing. And I'm happy that you had the courage to say these things.
Yep. And we're gonna talk about some of those points. I think, and maybe I have not been as forward, but I've spoken publicly on how the book is. I've had to read it a couple times, and I think in your video you explain that if everyone has to read something multiple times, it might not be the best written material. So that you mentioned that, and I've publicly pushed back on Nelson, like just because it says this in R. Nelson Nash's book doesn't mean that it's like we bow to it. So I've and and I've gotten I've gotten pushback on that. I've gotten maybe pushback when it comes to just because that's the way that we've always done something doesn't mean it's the right way, and like let's challenge something. And I had someone, this is a totally different topic. I had someone tell me recently, they said, Caleb, if you 1035 a whole life policy, you should go to jail. Like they said that statement, and I'm like,
I guess
okay.
I need to go to jail. I 1035 exchanged a whole life. It's a funny story. I 1035 exchanged a whole life policy that I designed. I was the agent on both policies.
Yeah. So that's a statement. And my initial reaction is not to jump over it. I want to seek to understand. But
right.
I think those statements are tough because I personally know of situations where that would be a really, really hard statement to like back up at all times.
Right.
Do I think it's a generally so all
in
that
general,
to say is
I agree.
This is what I responded with. And this is a person that's got more industry experience than I've been alive, heavily respected. And I said, I appreciate your understanding. I want to get that same conviction. Will you show me the number and can we run through scenarios? So it wasn't you're right, you're wrong. Like I'm seeking to understand. But I'm not just going to let your seniority create a statement and then for me to stop asking questions. And I think we need to be asking more questions and all. So I want to preface that. So there's that. On the flip side, I had the pleasure of meeting Nelson a couple times.
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Nelson. I had the pleasure of getting to know him. I'm also not Catholic, by the way, and so I'm maybe not as triggered by maybe some of the things about using scripture, and we'll definitely talk about that in his book because I definitely think that rubbed you the wrong way, and I want to seek to understand. I think where the video that rubbed me the wrong way when watching that was like, my producer just told me something wild. Only 6% of you who have subscribed to our channel have enabled notifications for our videos. That means 94% of you watching right now won't get told by YouTube when we upload a new video. So whether you're brand new or one of our longtime subscribers, if any of our 1,000+ videos have helped you think differently or brought value in any way, I would love for you to hit the bell and turn on all notifications. We've got some incredible guests and conversations planned for 2026, and I don't want you to miss them. Thank you so much for supporting this channel, and I'm excited to keep growing with you. Almost like let's attack ideas, but almost like attacking maybe someone after they passed away. And especially, and again, like it's like he's fair game because you're a public figure. When you're a public figure, you it's not like you're going after someone that has no public following. So that I just want
I've heard you call Dave Ramsey a hypocrite. So
right. So and again, I have no problem with I've also been very pleasant to Dave from a standpoint of what I respect, and I personally wouldn't go after Dave's character from a standpoint because I think he's actually got really, really strong character. I may disagree with his opinions on things, but I think he's very principled, and for that I respect him. But same thing with R. Nelson Nash. I look at a man who's insanely principled, just from a standpoint of like, yeah, do I disagree with maybe some of the ways that he explained things? Absolutely. But he's a man that I see very principled. And he's playing, in my opinion, a bigger game than just insurance. Insurance was always something that he was like backing into because of some of his principles. And so even in the podcast that I interviewed, he said some things that, straight up you could take as being racist. Like he literally said some things that you're like, man, if this was taken out of context, like I don't think you can say this. But I looked at it as this is, you look at his age, you look at his upbringing. I judged his character and what I knowed him, and I'm like, does does Nelson hate someone because of their, absolutely not. So there's maybe some things that he said that, you know, if someone had zero context, they could maybe put him in a corner. But like I don't even feel bad about not even it's included in the podcast, because it's just like, for those of you that know that, you know, kind of deal. So I preface that by saying I think potentially there's a, we can challenge people from like the book idea, from the maybe like, hey, I disagree with this. I think the moment you maybe go at someone who especially is no longer here, who's had an impact, you're gonna get pushback regardless around like, hey, we can challenge the books and stuff, but challenging his character, and again, you have, I want you to speak to the Catholic thing. You're right to say that, but that's where I, even when I was watching, I was like, oh boy, Logan, you're stirring the pot here, because I'm like, I would not go there with a 10-foot pole, but you did. And so and again,
I felt morally obliged to. I
yeah,
felt morally obliged to. So you say I'm attacking Nelson Nash. I think I'm acting in self-defense. You know, now, did I get emotional about it? Sure, but that's, I think, very understandable, right? So, um, if someone feels that their religion has been insulted, you're going to get emotional, and so I would give people a lot of leeway for that, just understanding that, yeah, that it's something that is deliberately hurtful. I respect the fact that Nelson has principles. I respect the fact that the Nelson Nash Institute has principles. That's one of the things I like about them. In fact, I think you and I would disagree a bit on that, because that's some of the criticisms I've heard you throw the way of the Nelson Nash Institute and Nelson Nash are actually the opposite, right? Where I would actually respect the fact that they have principles and they live by those principles. I would take a bit more of a practical approach when it comes to, say, working with banks, but I respect the fact that they have principles, and I understand where they're coming from, because the banking system is flawed, right?
right.
And I respect the fact that they want to remove their financial energy from the banking system as much as they realistically can. And I don't think it's fair to characterize Nelson Nash as saying we're going to overthrow the Fed. I don't think that's a fair characterization of him. I think he's much more realistic and practical, saying no, we can't do that, but you and I can, right? Like, there are things that you and I can do. Just like I can't overthrow the IRS, but you and I can implement some tax strategies where we can reduce our tax burden, right? Um, so yeah, should I have published the video? Again, I feel like I had no choice, and is it going to rub a
Yeah.
lot of people the wrong way? Yeah, but I don't feel like I was ever attacking Nelson,
Okay.
right? I am talking about externals. I'm not judging anyone's character, but I can and I must judge someone's external actions. That's the difference, right? So, you know, I would say if there's been an attack, you know, then Nelson threw the first shot over the bow, right? More than a shot over the bow, punch to the face, right? So,
Was this something that you were aware of when you were a part of the institute, or was
I
this something that
was,
you were
yeah,
made aware of after?
I cannot remember when it was when I read the book, and I was shocked at the time, and I said, "Oh, wow, okay." I can't remember exactly when I read that book, but it was probably after I had joined. It's probably when I became aware of it, right?
Okay.
And this is, by the way, one of the things you said earlier about you not being cowed by somebody else's seniority. I think that's an important point, because in every industry and in every team, you want a good mix of people. You want a good mix of personalities, and you want a good mix of experience levels. You want the grizzled veteran, and you also want the guy who's totally green. I don't look down on people who have no experience, because they come with a unique perspective, and there's always something that they can bring to the table that we shouldn't talk down to them. Sometimes I think people in our industry gain a lot of experience, and then they just won't listen to anyone who is green, and I think that's a problem. So I would say me being an outsider to the Nelson Nash Institute is very valuable. Most of my career before becoming an agent was doing consulting. And I learned that as a consultant, I bring the most underrated value that a consultant brings is that I'm an outsider. So I can see things that people from the inside cannot see. And they might be incredibly valuable people, but they're insiders. And so there's certain things they cannot see, and there's certain things they cannot say that I, as an outsider, can. And someone who's smart is going to value that perspective. Just like when you get feedback from other people, it's valuable because you can't see yourself from the outside, right? You can't see how you're being perceived. Maybe you're delivering what you think is the right message, but it's not being received the way you want it to be received. And so when people give you feedback, it's valuable. Then you can adjust your message without compromising the integrity of it, right?
I guess here's my question. Do you, because you called out two people who we don't need to name in this video, but you called out two people that are labeled as Catholic. I don't know anyone's heart. I don't know what they're currently doing with their lives. I'll just say that they've in the past said that they are Catholic, and you made some pretty strong statements about even Judgment Day and all. Do you think if someone is Catholic, being a part of the Institute is like problem when it comes to like the underlying faith and their convictions with the church?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I don't know that I have a clear black and white answer, but I would say there is some tension there that they would need to address. How they address it, I don't know. I personally wouldn't want to be a member, or if I were a member, I would have to make it very clear that I'm not endorsing this particular statement, this particular language that Nelson used. I have to be very careful not to give any implicit consent to that sort of language. So I think that if you are a very prominent, well-known member of the Nelson Nash Institute, it's more incumbent upon you to distance yourself from that rhetoric. How you do that is up to you. Maybe there is a path where you can still be a member of the Nelson Nash Institute as long as you just make it clear, I'm following this financial strategy. I'm not following these other writings of Nelson Nash.
Right. And I mean, for the most part, I would say majority of people do that with almost anything. I'm not going to assume that you voted for Donald Trump. I personally did. And he's someone that I would not agree with across the board. I think this is a common question across the board on a lot of people that perceived as being Christians, is like, you look at two choices. People might be dunking with me in the comments. I still, even though I'm not, quite frankly, the biggest fan of especially this term and all the things that are going down, especially from a libertarian view. I chose, and I'm not regretting that choice, to back someone because I felt like he was a better choice than the other person. And so that is probably the most extreme example that a lot of people can relate. And so for me, it's that's a choice that is like leading this country, which is arguably a much potentially bigger deal. But we make these choices a lot. I do business. I probably have people on the show that I'm not necessarily co-signing, and I would be a very miserable person if I was like, hey, I need to make sure everything. It almost feels like a little bit like woke cancel culture in some cases. Like, oh, this person said a tweet in 2016, like now I need to. And so that's where I was just the more like, that's probably the pushback I would give. And again, we don't, we share.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I don't think we're going to resolve that in this conversation. Like, my intention was just say to those two individuals and to everyone, this is something you need to consider. Because I think there are people who may not be aware of this, who, if they were aware, might distance themselves some more. And so all I'm saying is, in your own mind and with your own conscience, you need to address this. How you address it is up to you. How you address it is totally up to you. Because, yeah, you're right. I certainly do business. I have to hold my nose and do business with people all the time in our line of work, because they're adding value to my clients. I certainly wouldn't want to I wouldn't want anyone to take that as an implicit endorsement of everything that they're doing and saying. But I do think that when I listen to those two gentlemen and others talk, it's on another level, right? Like, they really are, it seems to me, raising this man on a pedestal. It's not just, well, I'm a member of the Nelson Nash Institute for practical reasons, and I don't agree with him on everything, but I feel like I kind of have to be to do my work, right? So I'm not telling them what to do. I'm not accusing them of anything. I'm just telling them this is something you need to address in your own mind. And I would view it as an act of charity, right? It's what we call, it's not even fraternal correction necessarily, but it's an act of charity is what it is. And what they do with it is up to them. But I do think that's where an outsider's perspective can be valuable.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned in your video that you said, Nelson, one thing you respect about him is he was not into himself.
Correct.
And the people that had the pleasure of meeting and spending time with him, one of the gentlemen that you called out spent a lot of time with Nelson. I would consider Nelson was like a father figure to this person. And when you're around someone who genuinely is not, like, Nelson was not playing 4D chess. He was, you got what you got with him. And there was, I remember my first interaction with him, I'm asking him a question. I had like a list. I was a type A, had a whole list. We were at lunch and I got through 2 questions because he was giving me the Exodus story around. I'm like, Nelson, I asked you about PUAs. I didn't ask you about the Moses rescuing the people from Egypt kind of deal. But again, like, and this is where like there's some sage wisdom in that, whereas like, okay, in a world with ChatGPT and Google, everyone's wanting just quick answers.
Right.
And
right.
there's something really special about saying like, listen, you're asking this question and let me like take 10 steps back, because the question that you're asking is very a type A question and you're in the process of missing the big picture. And I also, just to be clear, I have no problem with the Institute and people deciding on principle. Yes, I don't necessarily think we going to take over the banking system and all, but like if someone does not want to do business with banks because they don't want to do business with banks, totally respect that 100%. Just don't gaslight me and say that this is also great financial decision at the same time. It might be, but that's where I get the
not
problem.
According to the numbers, but according to their comfort
their
level or
conviction,
whatever.
But don't tell me like, so that's where I get passionate and I'll like push back. But
I got it.
So in my,
I don't think they're gaslighting you, by the way. I think they're just in their own mind, they actually believe it.
Yeah. And so but for me, I almost give him a pass in some areas, because I'm like, man, when I spend time with Nelson, like he genuinely loves people. And like I remember one day in class, I was like playing phone tag with him and I was like in college and I get a call from Nelson Nash and I like walk out and those are the times I cherish. I'm like, that's wild. I'm grateful that I saw the call. I'm grateful that I had enough courage to like get out of class and take a phone call. But those are the kind of things he was just checking in. And so all that to say, like, I think you even mentioned that, but that's where I go. That's where I think like anyone that knows Nelson, I think would, if they watch your video, would be maybe offended, just like you were offended by the statements that he made, about the Catholic Church. They would be offended for almost being like, man, you're mischaracterizing him, or you're maybe potentially slandering his character, and he's not even alive to back it up. We don't have to talk anymore, but I want to give you a time to respond, and then I actually want to talk about what you admire about him before we go into some of the other points that I think are totally fair game when you talk about his book being written, explaining people maybe like not thinking for themselves, as you would say it, from a standpoint. We can talk about all of that. I want to address the thing that I felt like was most extreme about your video, but I also think was the biggest reason you made the video. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think like that was where I saw the most passion about you speaking. And so that's what I wanted to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're mischaracterizing what I was saying. I never slandered his character. I'm talking about his external actions, not judging his internal character, which we have to, because for better or for worse, he is linked to the infinite banking concept. And I'm talking about perception, right? Like I said, even if what I'm saying is 100% perception, which I'll grant that it is 100% perception, 0% reality, it's still something we need to address, right? Because one of the things I see with some members of the Nelson Nash Institute is when people try to give them feedback, they just get frustrated and angry and tell them to shut up and I'm speaking the truth. Maybe you are speaking the truth, and I'm not telling you to compromise your message or change it at all, but maybe you could just receive that feedback and realize, okay, maybe there's a better way I can say this without compromising the integrity of the message. But instead, they just get frustrated and angry and just repeat themselves, right? And just say, you just need to read the book again. Maybe, maybe we can do a better job of explaining it. Maybe we should view this feedback as being valuable. Some of it's not fair, I'm sure, but my experience has been, no matter how trolly someone is being, there's probably at least 2% of what they're saying that is true and that is valuable. And ironically, Caleb, I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, the negative feedback you get is way more valuable than the positive feedback that you get. The negative feedback hurts. It definitely hurts. But if we can kind of take a step back, think about it, realize, hey, there's actually something that's valuable here. I've always found that to be the case. And even if it's just a perception issue, that should be good news. It's easier to fix a perception issue, right?
Right. Okay. I appreciate you saying that. Let's go to what you admire about our Nelson Nash next, and then we'll go into some of your other points. So if I had to ask you, Logan, list off some things that you really admire about Nelson, what would those be?
So first of all, he is the originator of the infinite banking concept. He is the authority figure. Give him credit for that. Another is I just think he's a really tough, persevering, fortitudinous kind of guy. He was really the lone voice in the wilderness, and he stuck to it, right? And he didn't give up. He persevered a lot more than I probably would have. I think he was just a very tough guy. And you have to be when you're in that situation where you're kind of on your own. And there's something else I was going to say, but I lost it. But he's certainly the authority figure on the infinite banking concept. I think he's also brilliant in his own way, right? I mean, I think his ability to apprehend these ideas and to see something bigger, right? Obviously, we both know the infinite banking concept is not about whole life insurance. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that it is, but that's because they're missing the bigger picture that Nelson would see. And I'll also say that his, telling stories and using analogies is actually in many ways very helpful, right? Mm-hmm. Those can be very powerful because oftentimes when people ask a question, there's a preconceived notion behind the question that has to be addressed. So we got to back up. Let's not answer the question directly, not because we're trying to dodge the question, but because we got to lay out the principles. Oh, and that's the other thing. I respect the fact that he had principles and that he lived by those principles, especially when it requires sacrifice, right? Because some people might have principles that don't require much sacrifice to live. And okay, they may not be hypocrites, but they're not exactly people we respect. But when you have principles that you live by and it requires sacrifice and you're willing to do those sacrifices, I respect that also. Someone who has principles and who lives his life by those principles, I definitely respect that.
Yeah. I agree on the principle standpoint, and it's interesting because when I think about his book, all the number portions aren't very clear. It's like clear as mud in my brain, because obviously it's hard to comprehend. A lot of the stories.
Let me interrupt you and quickly say Nelson himself admitted that if he were going to write the book again, he wouldn't include any of those illustrations, right? So if Nelson himself says the book has some flaws to it, then maybe we can acknowledge the book has some flaws to it.
Right. What I was going to say is like the golden rule or the airplane analogy or the shot analogy about volume versus interest or not letting the camel in the tent. There's there's a lot of those pieces that I will have the rest of my life as like there's a principle tied to all of those. And so when you say, the book was poorly written and, it was clear as mud from a standpoint and not explaining the concept well. I think you said it's just the concept poorly. I want to hear you out there because I think in a world you might be right depending on how you're measuring it, but then there is something special about like why do you think his book has sold so many copies? There's still a movement to this day. There's more videos being made, even by non-practitioners, on this concept. Like it's like we can say whatever we want. Results speak louder than words, and it's never the concept itself. I'm not sure about book sales, but the concept itself has never been stronger. And so
I agree.
So why do you think that is? If it was a poorly written, wasn't explained well, like wouldn't there be another movement that would take off way faster? Like I know you've probably thought through this. I wanted to challenge you on that.
It speaks to the power of the message. Nelson Nash was not the message. He was the messenger. And that's why I appreciate the fact that he didn't make it about himself. It's about the message, not the messenger. And that's why I think Nelson Nash, if he could see what the Nelson Nash Institute is doing today, he might say, guys, stop making it about me. It's not about me. It's about the idea. Let's talk about the idea. That's what it's about. So there are other people I could compare him to that I think are not the best messengers, but are sincere and are true believers. And if you're a true believer and your idea is sound, that by itself will overcome a lot of these other deficiencies, right? I think we all get sick of seeing the opposite, where someone is like very slick. They know how to talk, they know how to maneuver, right? They come across so well, they sound so great, but really what they're trying to do is just manipulate you, right? And we see a lot of that. Nelson Nash was a true believer, and I think that has a power all its own. So I still think that the lack of clear communication hurts us, but still the message and the idea itself is so great that it can overcome all those things. But I still think we can do better, right? The reason why I bring this up is because I respect the Nelson Nash Institute. If I didn't respect them, I wouldn't bother talking about these things. If I didn't believe in the infinite banking concept, I wouldn't bother talking about these things. If I didn't think Nelson Nash was a great man in many ways, I wouldn't bother talking about him, right? So they should, I hope, take it as a sign of respect that I think it's important enough to talk about these things.
I hear you. When you talk about, you said in your video that most practitioners that you talk to or people in the institute can't articulate what infinite banking really is or the concept itself. If you like, how would you answer that? And I think you even admitted that you don't necessarily have the right solution for it.
I don't have the answer.
How would you answer that? Because I think there's actually some beauty in not having like this is exactly what you say in the elevator. And it might be one of the reasons why it's still lasts to this day, because it's like, how do you explain your Christian faith? Like there's tons of different ways you can answer that. Or it's like you ask, how do you explain the gospel? You could get 100 priests and pastors in the same room, and there may be a difference in how someone articulates that. But I'm just curious, like, how would you, if you were running the institute, what would be like the key things that you would almost have to be like? I'll use the gospel as an example. Like, there's certain core aspects when you're explaining the gospel that you have to mention for it to be the gospel, but then there's a lot of different flavors. What would be your core message when it comes to infinite banking?
So there's a lot of things there. First of all, in terms of the stated positions of the Nelson Nash Institute, I would change nothing. I have no problem with what they say. It's more about the strategy. It's more about the behavior, right? I was kicked out of the Nelson Nash Institute for violating exactly 0 of their rules, right? Their written rules anyway. So it's more of a culture thing, I would say. There's a lot you threw at me there. First of all, I would say that I disagree with you. When it comes to the Holy Catholic Faith, we have very simple, very clear articulations that you can look up anywhere. St. Thomas Aquinas, the Roman Catechism, there are places you can go to that will very precisely lay out and very concisely, here's exactly what we believe. But within that, there is an infinite, ultimately, mystery. You could spend your whole life trying to articulate it, and you would never plumb the depths. But you can precisely define, here's the meaning of life, here's what we believe, period. And I think it's similar with the infinite banking concept. You should be able to clearly, precisely articulate what it is, period. That doesn't mean that exhausts everything about it, right? That just means you indicate here's what it is. And I do not have the answer. I think some people think that I'm saying I have the answer. I don't, but I can see that there's an issue, right? And I don't know that, and that's where I think going back to the book so much hurts us a little bit, because we don't come up with, we don't really grow. Our understanding doesn't grow. We just keep going back to the book. Okay, we can use that as a starting point. If you want to call it the starting point, the foundation, I'm fine with that. Yeah. That doesn't mean our understanding can never grow, right?
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why Nelson and the book and all have taken off is he truly was. He wasn't in it for the money. Like, that's really, really clear. And so it's like, okay, if someone were to write this part 2, probably David Stearns would be maybe the only person that could do it with still, like, because there could be lots of people that could participate, but then it's like, okay, what's the motivation? Is the motivation for money? Is it for fan? Like, how? And so I think they and that's a tricky situation. And so there's been lots of innovation in areas, but then there's also like protection, because it's like, hey, we don't want any, even if their person's super well intentioned, they can hijack the movement, and that's what's tricky. And so yeah, I don't have the best solution. I will say, just again, to give them their credit, they do require you to take an assessment and test. That's, I've been very public about that. That's why it took me years to become a practitioner. Is it's like I hate tests and I just never got around to it. But to their credit, you go through a course, and then you so they want you to have some basic understanding. Now we could debate the course that I taught or that I went through and passed. Does that really translate into me helping someone with when it comes to their money? We could have it. That's a separate conversation. But they were forward thinking enough to say, hey, we can't just co-sign anyone that wants to pay us money. Respect that. They also have a list. So of
why
readings.
co-sign anyone, right? I mean, I think that's, again, I don't have a problem if they want to have their officially authorized practitioner problem. I have no problem with that per se. So again, when it comes to like their officially stated positions, I don't disagree with them. We agree on all the substantive issues, 100%. It's more about the strategy. To me, I don't know that that's the best strategic move, because now the problem is you are co-signing people who become officially authorized, and you now, if those people do something wrong, which at some point someone will, now you get caught up in the fallout from that. So I would, to use a word you used, I would take a bit more of a libertarian view and just say, look, we're here to support you. Here's what we believe in, but we're not going to co-sign on anyone.
But how do they get paid? What would be the way that you would?
Do they need to get paid?
Well, I mean, if
they could get donations, right? I mean, there are plenty of true believers in the infinite banking concept who say, yeah, this is a good institution, I want to support them.
But doesn't the idea of donating go against free market? Like, wouldn't that almost be a slap in the face in itself, as if the institution would just rely on donations?
No, because it's voluntary, right? The point of the free market is it's voluntary. There doesn't have to be a profit motive, as long as it's voluntary. What does go against the free market is sending out cease and desist letters, right? Where you're using the threat of government violence to silence people. That's anti-free market. That's something I think Nelson Nash would have serious reservations with, because Nelson Nash believed in Austrian economics, right? Again, he was a very intelligent, well-read man. And he saw that the Austrians, according to him, have it correct. Bob Murphy is a famous Austrian economist, right? And so I think most of them, I think Nelson Nash would have a serious problem with the way that the Nelson Nash Institute is using government violence or the threat of government violence to shut people down. And even putting aside the morality of it, I just don't think it's productive,
I hear you. You mentioned in your video that you like, even the idea of think long range is a poor example. You early on when you mentioned like Aristotle in your video, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like we have some high standards. I'm like, I would fail everything because I've read 0 on Aristotle, so put me in that category as well. But I'm just curious, like I actually like the concept of thinking long range. I get what you're saying about eternity and all, but what is the problem with thinking 50 years, 70 years down? I mean, I might not live to 50 years from now or 70 years from now, but what's the problem with thinking that? That shouldn't stop there. We should think, hopefully, especially if you're a believer, eternity. But I don't necessarily.
Which is the opposite. So you're saying, see, that's not thinking in terms of eternity. First of all, we don't know the world's going to be around 50 years from now. I don't know when the world is going to end, but it will end. And according to St. Teresa of Avila, anything that has an end shouldn't be thought of as having any value at all. So we should not think long range, right? Some people think that thinking in terms of eternity means time that just goes on forever. No, it's the opposite. Eternity is the stans nunc, the standing now. It's one moment stretched out forever. It's the opposite of time. It's not like you go 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, and then once you get far enough out on the continuum, you get to eternity. No, eternity is the opposite, right? So you cannot think long range and think in terms of eternity. Those two are conflicting, right? Because whether you think long range or whether you think short range, you're now thinking in terms of time. But eternity is not time. It's not time bound, right? So if I think 50, 70 years into the future, there's a lot of presumption on my part that I know something about the future when I know nothing about the future. The world might not be here 70 years from now, right? I might not be here. So as far as I'm concerned, my job is to save my own soul, right? And once I enter into the next life, none of this other stuff matters at all, right? So I think long range is not the correct way to articulate it. The correct way to articulate it is proper financial structure. The medievals who built these magnificent cathedrals, they were thinking in terms of eternity. They started those cathedrals. Many of them never saw the completion of the cathedrals, but they didn't say, let's think long range. They just understood that if you want to build a huge structure, you need a large foundation, and it takes time to build all those things up. But they were just doing it because of eternal principles. And if they drop dead tomorrow, it will still have merit, not because of the cathedral itself, because that's going to end with the end of the world, but because I was hopefully doing it for the right reasons and performing an act of virtue. And that's what ultimately matters. I'm trying not to get too philosophical.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to seek to understand, because it's so you have a problem with someone like, just because I'm thinking 30 years from now, how I read that is and it's very biblical in my opinion, because you read Proverbs. Proverbs is there's a ton around like delaying gratification, being disciplined, even building storehouses of wealth. And so I just think of anytime you zoom out, things get a lot more, like, maybe your priorities shift a little bit. And just because I might not be around 50 years from now, it doesn't mean that the decisions won't have a ripple effect. And yeah, of course, it's like, no one knows the hour that Christ is coming back. So I want to preface that, where it's like, I just don't see them as contradicting. I don't see thinking about my daughter's kids and like thinking about what can we establish today as being problematic with eternity. In fact, I think one of the most valuable things that you can do is like be thoughtful about your death and all, because it makes you live more intentionally today. So that's
but yeah, well, I don't agree about living intentionally. That's contrary to having faith in divine providence. It rests on two false presuppositions. One, that I'm in charge of my life. No, I'm not. My life would look completely different. I didn't choose to have all these health issues that limit me. I'm not in charge of anything. The only thing I'm in charge of is my own very weak will. That's the only thing I'm in charge of. The other false presupposition behind living intentionally is that I know what's best for me. No, I don't, right? Unless the Lord build the city, they labor in vain who build it. So what I need to do is just focus on the present moment, live in the present moment, not brood over the past, not have anxiety over the future, or the false presumption that I can plan for the future, right? So when I lay out, a life insurance illustration, I'm doing it not to say this is what's going to happen 30 years from now. I'm doing it to illustrate a concept so we understand what's going on, right? So I'm against living intentionally. What we should be doing is, like the title of the book says, abandonment to divine providence. That's really what we should be doing, letting somebody else be in charge, not letting me be in charge, not letting me make the decisions. Because if I make the decisions, first of all, I can't even affect what I want to affect. There are a lot of things that I want that if I try to get them, I'm just going to be frustrated, right? So, I think, again, it goes back to building proper financial structure. And the reason why I think thinking long range is challenging is that it implies that infinite banking doesn't make sense today. It only makes sense 30 years from now, right? I put the policy in force today, but really what I'm doing doesn't make sense until 30 years from now. No, it makes sense today. If it doesn't make sense today, it doesn't make sense at all, right?
Yeah, look, I hear you, and I feel like we should be on a different podcast, and we could probably talk.
We're getting dragged into a totally different direction.
So some of it is just a philosophical, maybe, like, because I do have some disagreements, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the topic. So I appreciate
totally getting
your
dragged.
articulation of that.
But I think Nelson would appreciate we're talking about first principles. I think Nelson would appreciate that.
I agree. So do you not believe in estate plan? Like, when you estate planning, if someone comes to you and says,
we do estate planning. Yeah, no, we do it.
Isn't that?
But
isn't
always,
that
always with a great deal of humility. Right? We do it because we're called to be responsible stewards of everything
Okay.
that we are given in this life, not because I have some presumption that I know what the future is going to hold, right?
Yeah.
I might die tomorrow and my estate plan might blow up. No matter how well I've constructed it, it's always possible some greedy government bureaucrat or some slick attorney might blow up my estate plan, right? I do it because it's the right thing to do. I could build that cathedral and a storm could destroy it, right? I do
Of
it
course.
because it's the right thing to do, not because I have some presumption that I have any control over events in the future.
Okay. All right. We'll move on. Another point that you made is you're not a fan of Nelson using scripture in his book, and so I'm come from the Protestant world. I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I appreciate people that lead with that, but I also want to just I am very wary of people using scripture to potentially push an agenda. And so maybe I just give Nelson a pass because I'm giving him like I can't know anyone's intent, but when you meet him, you're like, okay, this person's not trying to like play 40 chess and manipulate people. Like he's genuinely
I didn't say anything about his
come
intentions.
from yeah.
You keep putting words in my mouth. I didn't say anything about Nelson's character or his intentions.
No, but so no, I'm not saying any. I'm not pushing back on you. I'm just letting you know why.
Okay.
For me, I don't have any problems with it. In talking about scripture, but I do. I am wary when people use scripture just in period. Just in business, if someone is really public about their faith, be more cautious because. That it's just there's more nightmares. Why do you have a problem with someone like him in his book using scripture and examples in his writing?
Well, in the way that he does it, I'm not judging anything about his character or his intention. It is blasphemous. So I'm against blasphemy. Scripture can be used in a way that is blasphemous. I'm not going to repeat any of that. Like I'm not going to. Otherwise, I'd be spouting blasphemy too. So, and I agree with what you said that the more there's always an inverse. Now, I'm not talking about Nelson. I'm extracting from that, but there's always an inverse relationship between how much somebody talks about something versus how much they actually do it. So I would agree with you. The more someone leads with scripture, the more you need to be cautious. Like, wait a minute, why do you feel the need to keep saying that? Just live it, and then people will see that you're living it. So, yeah, I have a problem with the way that Nelson uses it in his book, and I'm not going to explain any of the details behind that. Again, I'm not judging his character. I don't know the man. I don't know anything about his intentions, but there are blasphemous ways of using scripture, and those I'm certainly against.
So the definition of blasphemy is the act of showing disrespect, essentially. I know that you don't necessarily want to cover anything because, in your opinion, if you cover it, you're also
it's not good to draw attention to it. It's not good to draw attention to it. It's not helpful.
But those are strong words, like showing an act of disrespect. Those are like I would say saying that I am blasphemy, which I would be a part of that because I've definitely used scripture in talks and all. I'm not sure if I use them in videos. I'm just curious, like, what is that? Is this a Catholic thing or is this an opinion thing?
I don't think so. No, I think I agree with what you said. I think that let's abstract from Nelson for the moment. I think that all of us can agree that there are people, especially in our space, unfortunately, who will use scripture basically as a means to promote their own business. And we can all agree that's not something you should be doing, right? I try to avoid using any of the sacred text in my business at all. I try to avoid it completely. Because now I do think it's fair to say maybe, I don't even know if this is true, but maybe it's true that Catholics have an elevated sense of reverence for sacred texts and sacred things such that we don't even want to mention them. We don't even want to speak them because even to speak them is just making light of them. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Maybe I shouldn't have said blasphemous. I can maybe take that back a little bit and say maybe making light of, maybe a bit of irreverence might be a better way to say it rather than out and out blasphemy. But yeah, it always makes me very nervous when I see people quoting scripture. Unless you're a priest in the pulpit, I don't know why you would do that. The point is to live it. Don't quote it, right? Otherwise, you're potentially making yourself a hypocrite.
Yeah. Okay. We'll
I'll just say that it really, really, really rubbed me the wrong
yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And I'm not
for
the
that,
only one.
for the
I'm not
same
the only one.
thing.
I can
Yeah.
tell you that.
And for that same reason, that's attracted people like myself to the movement, not because I'm like, wow, someone is willing in a world. Well, you know how some people are like, don't bring politics and faith into something. You got to be careful. And I do appreciate when people, you know, stand for something and they but I think you got to be careful, and we're going to all go before the Lord someday, and he's the only one that can really judge intentions. And so I
Right.
just that's probably the last thing I want to cover. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about, or is there anything that after reflecting that you're like, hey, these are what I want on record? I do appreciate you willing to have this conversation because I'll get criticized regardless. I'll be criticized if I don't comment on your video. I'll be criticized for bringing you back on. I don't necessarily care about the whole platforming thing. I just don't. I think we should be challenging ideas, and hopefully, in someone watching this, gained more. But what else would you like to say before we land the plane on this topic?
I would just say let's try to focus on the idea. Let's focus on the ideas. And I think that's what Nelson Nash would want. He wouldn't want us focused on him. And, I think that his ideas are sound. Financially speaking, I don't think I would disagree with Nelson on anything. I think he's brilliant. I think his financial ideas are very sound and very insightful. And same thing with what the Nelson Nash Institute states publicly. I 100% agree with their ideas. But maybe it's more a question of strategy. What's the best way of promoting these ideas? What's the best way moving forward, right? And again, I hope that it's going to be seen, unfortunately, as bashing. People have used that word. That's not my intention to bash anyone, but I do judge externals, and I think self-hatred is a bad thing, but self-criticism is a good thing. That's how we move forward. So I hope that they'll take it as, a helpful series of questions rather than me being negative.
Yeah, you've offered good questions. What would, if you were in their shoes, would you be leaning towards anything? Like, would you, in your opinion, do you think they should just get rid of the institute, like certifying people, and have it be more of a nonprofit, have people voluntarily give if they like the concept? Like, what would you do if you were in their shoes to try to correct some of the things that you see that you don't like?
Well, it's a good question. I don't have an answer. Let me be clear. I think precisely identifying the problem is half the battle. What's the solution? I don't know. I don't have a solution. I haven't thought through, so I'll give an answer that's not thought through. So I might regret this later, but I probably wouldn't have officially authorized practitioners. I would more try to promote and encourage the infinite banking concept. And there's lots of different ways you could potentially do that, like providing resources for agents to get trained. And if you want, then you could just charge for the training and saying, hey, we're not endorsing you. We're not giving you any kind of certificate. But if you want to take advantage of these resources, you pay us a fee. I think mentorship would be great. And I'll give them credit. I think that's something they're trying to build. That's really challenging. But having like apprenticeships would be awesome. And I give them credit. They're trying to build that, but that's really hard to do that right. But I don't have the answer. I would just say, yeah, I probably wouldn't be giving anyone official stamps of approval. I probably wouldn't be doing that.
Well, one last thing, because I'm just curious how you would go about it. You've mentioned in your video about the cultish worship of Nelson, and there is a fine line between worshiping someone that is. I think that's blasphemy. I think that's the definition of, like, if you it's a
idolatry. It's not blasphemy. It's idolatry.
It's like, if you worship someone, so that just for the record, and Nelson himself would say not to do that. There is a fine line between like honoring somebody and remembering them and holding traditions, and that's one of the ways that you build tradition. It's a fine line. I think we both can acknowledge that. Anything you want to comment on that? Because I've come a very full circle here, and I think it also goes back to if someone says like, this is the way I do it because Nelson said in his book, or Nelson had a conversation. He said, I can respect that you're telling me that, but that does nothing for me, because it's like, let's talk about today. What's the best? Let's make the best idea win. But I also, in the same breath, would be like, I want to go above and beyond and honor people that have come before us. I don't know why. I have to really think of like, what about me likes honoring people, especially the people that have passed. Maybe it's because I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for someone like him or whatnot. So I do think it's a fine line. I personally don't put him on a pedestal and would consider worshiping him. But I also spend more time thinking about him than other people because of the impact he's had on my life.
Yeah, so you knew the man personally, right? This is one of the reasons why I think I can be a bit more objective. I can understand totally why people get emotional and upset if they knew Nelson personally. And if those people get emotional and upset over what I'm saying, I totally understand. He was your friend. He was your family member. You knew the man. Just like I'm going to get upset and emotional because of some of the things that Nelson said that attack in a very vicious, underhanded way, things that are near and dear to my heart. So for me, Nelson's legacy will always be tainted because of some of the totally inexcusable things that he said about the religion that I hold dear, and that cannot be excused. Do I know his intentions? No. Do I judge his character? No. But that external behavior is completely inexcusable in one of his published edited works. So for me, I wouldn't honor him. I would honor the infinite banking concept. And if we want to, in a limited sense, honor him because he was the foremost expounder of that, okay, that's fine. But to me, it always would have to have a huge, gigantic asterisk next to it. And there's some analogies I'm thinking of that I won't say because it'll just make people more angry. But again, honoring people who are gone, sure, that's a good, valid tradition. It's a good thing to do. But maybe this also comes from me being a Catholic too, which is that, we have canonized saints. Those are the people that we venerate. If someone has not been canonized, yes, we need to do what's required of us in charity, but we need to be careful to not go beyond that, right? Because I think all of us, what we tend to do is we replace God basically with a person, somebody else, some other thing, person, place, or thing. And so we just have to be careful to avoid that. And I think you'll agree with me that there are some people who, like you said, they'll say, well, I do this because that's what Nelson Nash said. Okay, that's a starting point. That's weighty. That adds authority, but that in itself is not an argument.
Logan, I appreciate you taking the time addressing all these things and articulating this. And I hope that people that have waited till the end to listen to our whole conversation, that you will consider that before you're commenting. And I appreciate the thought. I do appreciate the thoughtful comments. I think we can learn from all perspectives. And I have one perspective, and I do look forward to hearing other people's perspectives on this. We'll have you back on again soon, and very much appreciate your time.
Caleb, I really appreciate your diplomatic approach. I really appreciate that you're trying to be a bridge builder. I try to learn from you, and I'm trying to get better at it. I'm not as good as you. So I think one of the reasons why I get more hatred, I'll be honest, like I'll apply it to myself, is I need to do a better job of being diplomatic. I could say things better in a way that wouldn't be as emotionally charged, and I need to do a better job of that. And you've helped me to see that. So when I get negative comments, I try to say, okay, what about this is true? And invariably, there's some kernel of truth to it, right? And what can I change? I can't control their behavior. So, and again, thank you so much for having me on your show. Obviously, you're someone I respect a lot.
If you're an advisor, life insurance agent, or someone who just loves the life insurance space, we have a must-attend event for you. It's our 5th annual Life Insurance Summit, June 15th through the 17th, right here in Nashville, Tennessee. Not only are we going to have the biggest names in the life insurance space, but this is also an incredible opportunity for you to meet and connect with like-minded individuals and be a part of our ever-growing community. Learn more and get your tickets before they sell out in the link in the description or pinned comment. Can't wait to see you there.